You are part of the revolution, the digital revolution. It means AI. Job creator or disruptor? AI for all? Or a growing divide leaving unlucky nations behind? But when AI and people come together, what frontiers can be explored? Or pushed? Or unleashed to unlock energy? Or create a cleaner environment? Digital is all around us, so let's be ambitious and make sure everyone is connected faster and more reliably, and that people and systems are protected and secure. We are building a digital future, and that future starts today. Closing the digital gap paves the way for everyone to leap ahead.
Good day to all of you watching all over the world. You know, we hear so many superlatives when it comes to AI, and I mean that in every way, both positive and negative. And what's clear is that artificial intelligence has the potential to revolutionize our world, especially when it comes to development. But the big question is, how do we not repeat the mistakes that led to the current digital divide, especially when it comes to AI? I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't run this intro through Gemini to see what I missed. And Gemini reminded me to say that we're moving beyond the theoretical into the deeply practical when it comes to generative AI adoption. And also added this: with these rapid advancement comes crucial questions about governance, risk, and ethical implications of this technology. As the World Bank itself has said in its inaugural Digital Trends and Progress report, this calls for a new playbook and a new level of cooperation between stakeholders like policymakers and the private sector, which is why I'm so delighted to have this conversation with the president of the World Bank, Ajay Banga, and Google's Senior Vice President of Research Labs, Technology and Society, James Manika. Welcome.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Ajay, let's start with last year, the World Bank announced the launch of a new digital vertical. Can you just give us an update on where you all are with that and how this fits into the bank's overall mission and vision?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I'm glad you're all here. This is our second effort to get a summit like this going. I hope it gets better and better. And Sangbu, who's sitting right here, whom you probably saw in the first session at the opening, is our head of that digital vertical. The idea of creating a separate digital vertical was to not say that digital is not an important part of human capital or prosperity or development of infrastructure. It is. But if it gets lost in each of those, it doesn't get to be seen in this quality and attention that it deserves, given the outsized implications it has for each and every aspect of development. So that's the reason to pull it out separately. We're beginning to make progress on what it should be doing for us. Not only should it focus on the creation of digital public infrastructure in countries so that they can use that to use the private sector and allow it to build on that DPI to enable the reach of digital services into the system. And as we know, digital is the one that breaks down barriers to entry. It's the one that takes away the advantages of incumbency. It does a lot of good stuff to enable things to spread. So the idea is to use that DPI and then allow the private sector to build on it to make things possible. That's one part of what he's trying to do. The other part of what he's trying to do is more germane to today's discussion, which is how do we help get AI to become embedded in countries in the emerging markets? How do we help them meet the challenges of using it, of not getting left behind, of creating the right governance and the right rules and the right systems around it? Those are the two main work streams that Sangbu and his team are focused on. The thing at the back of all this, and James, I've known James for a few years, so he can speak to this more eloquently than I can. But where I'm coming from, this is not about how we use it internally. That's important. But it's all about how this gets used in our clients. And I guess on the positive side of that, I see enormous pluses with this. In health and agriculture, you saw the video, and we're all here because we believe in the pluses. So repeating those is not going to be value added to you guys. The issue really is, do we have the right skills and infrastructure in these countries to enable that to happen? And then on the other side, there is the issue of governance and transparency and data protection and regulations. A friend of mine once said to me that this thing is so important that not regulating it would be a big error, but also not regulating it in the best possible way would be an even bigger error. And I kind of get that, and I'm trying to figure out what's the best way of dealing with this as we go forward. The difference between this and prior innovations and systems is the speed at which it's happening. So I don't think you have the luxury of saying, we've got a decade to figure this out, because a decade in AI terms is the equivalent of 50 years or whatever in normal terms. And that's the issue that we're trying to figure our way through.
Yeah. Can you want to just comment on the speed a little bit, James, and also just what you have seen and what you want this crowd to know about advancements that you've seen with AI?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. I did my PhD in AI and robotics almost 30 years ago, and I never could have imagined the progress that we've seen in the last decade, especially. You mentioned Gemini. So maybe in terms of to illustrate the pace and the progress, I'll mention a few things. First, the models are getting better, much better. They're more capable, they're more natively multimodal, which means they can work with any content of any kind, not just text and so forth. They're starting to be able to reason and think, these thinking models that allow to do deep research. And they're also becoming what's called agentic, which means it's more than just inputting things and getting outputs out. They can actually take actions on your behalf. They can be connected to other tools. So the models are getting extraordinarily better. And it's also worth mentioning on the models that we've seen, especially recently, that open models are also becoming increasingly capable, which is extraordinary, which opens up a whole set of other opportunities that I'm sure we'll come back to. The second thing I'd also highlight about the pace of progress is because AI is a general purpose technology, it's starting to impact other adjacent technologies. So take, for example, robotics. Robotics is going to have massive acceleration. We're already seeing that today in our models. I live in San Francisco, and as Google, we introduced Waymo driverless cars. And so if you live in San Francisco or LA or Phoenix, you're probably riding these cars. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, we reached a milestone where in those 3 cities, we're doing something like 200,000 paid rides in those cities, people using driverless cars safely in the city. So this is becoming every day, 200,000 rides a week. So if you come to San Francisco next time, RJ, we'll have to take you on a ride. I'm sure those of you who've been in San Francisco have been on these Waymo driverless cars. So the pace
I went around in a Waymo car inside your campus years ago, and I must confess it was the early days, and I was scared out of my mind. but that was a long time ago.
Well, so it's taken a very long time. So the driverless car project at Google has been going for almost 15 years.
Yeah, I was going to say, when did you take that ride?
When I was still at MasterCard, so it's got to be pre-COVID, so 2019 or something, with Sundar. Right. We kind of went into this car, and both of us looked petrified out of our minds, but it was fine after that.
Well, actually, Sundar tells the story of how he took his parents on a driverless car ride last year. So these have become quite real. Let me mention one other thing on the pace of progress. I think one of the things that's underappreciated is how in the last couple years especially, these models have become a lot more efficient, both in terms of the compute required or even the energy requirements. We're starting to see huge gains in efficiency. So I think all of this is fundamentally important. But I think where it matters, certainly for the purpose of this conversation here, is where we see the potential impacts and benefits. And here I think we're going to see those benefits in, I would say, 3 or 4 areas. First, how this actually benefits individuals who want access to information, be able to use these tools to help themselves with their own productivity and activities and so forth. That's one. The second is how this technology could actually power economies everywhere. As we said, in economic terms, this is one of those once in a long time general purpose technology where every part of economic activity, from small and medium-sized businesses to large companies to the public sector, and all of that will start to use this technology. So the economic potential is significant. The third area where we're going to see the impact, and we're already seeing it, is how this technology is already advancing scientific progress. You know, and I'll say something about that. And then, of course, this technology is starting to help us address some large global pressing challenges in society. But let me say one more quick thing about the scientific progress, because recently my colleagues won a Nobel Prize for some of their work using AI to actually advance some long-standing, almost like a 70-year grand challenge in biology, which is how to understand the structure of proteins, which was an incredible challenge because proteins are the workhorses of all of biology, all of it. If you want to understand diseases, discover drug therapies, vaccines, you have to understand how proteins work. And what they were able to do was, you know, before they did what they did, I think we only understood the structure of something like just over 100,000 proteins through extraordinary painful lab work that scientists have been doing for decades with techniques like X-ray crystallography and so forth. But the AI algorithm AlphaFold was able to discover the structure and predict the structure of all the proteins known to science, all 200 million of them. And we actually made that data set openly available. So today we've had something close to about just over 2.5 million biologists around the world in 190 countries accessing these data sets to be able to do their work and research, which allows you to tackle neglected diseases and so on. And you can go on to other areas of science, whether it's in climate science, in physics, material science, and so forth, and even helping to tackle challenges like floods and wildfires. In fact, one of the things we're very proud of is that we now are able to use AI techniques to predict floods with enough advance notice that, you know, because what you need to do is be able to, you know, predict floods with something like 5 or 6 or 7 days.
And wildfires as well.
I'll come back to wildfires, but the flood forecast, the reason why the flood forecast and the wildfires are important is they've become quite real. So what began as an initial kind of experiment we did in Bangladesh, and worked, and we now cover something like over 100 countries with more than 700 million people in those countries with flood predictions. And you mentioned wildfires. We're now covering about 27 countries with wildfire predictions for boundaries. In fact, just 2 days ago, I don't know if you saw this, we launched the next part of that project, which is these new satellites that we launched 2 days ago. It's the first of a constellation of what will be 53 satellites that will allow us to observe, if you like, before these satellites, what you could only observe was something like areas of about 25 by 25 meters and make predictions about that. With these new FireSat satellites that we launched, the first ones a couple of days ago, we'll be able to observe about 5 by 5 meters and make wildfire predictions. So this is going to be quite transformational. So you can see all these areas where this technology is starting to be extraordinarily helpful.
So I want to get back to some of those technologies, and Ajay, you also talked about skills. But before we get to the job skills, can I just go back to the idea of this AI divide and ask you how the bank is equipping countries to help overcome this?
Yeah, so look, I think that what AI needs to work well for a country are four things, right? And four principal things at a very basic level. The first is computing power, lots of it. The second is electricity, lots of it, although more efficient now than earlier, but it's still a heck of a lot more than we currently had planned for. Third is data, more of it, better than less of it, because it improves the predictive power of that data and to adapt it to your circumstances. But also that data needs to be kept in its simplest form, because that enables the most manipulation of the data. And then you need that data to be kept safe and secure in a way that protects privacy. There's a lot of ifs and buts inside that data. And then the fourth element of this is the people who understand how to use that. That's the skills part I was referring to. So you've got, none of this works without the right kind of access to the internet as well, because otherwise people using it for their own purposes, as James was just describing, doesn't happen without access to the internet. And internet doesn't happen without access to electricity. So there's a bunch of things we can do. We've launched this thing of reaching 300 million people in Africa with electricity. I'm not talking about 2 solar lanterns in a room. I'm talking about the productive use of electricity at tier 3 levels so that they can get computers and televisions and the access to the internet and a chance to be a productive part of their society. That kind of effort to me is foundational to enable this infrastructure and skills to begin to get built. I worry about it because I think of 2 things that happen if you don't do it well. One is a lot of the emerging markets are subscale in their absolute size. So unless they are willing to collaborate across a number of markets, they will never get to the right scale or size that will allow companies or others to get them to be the right cost-value dynamic. The second is, because data, it kind of goes through cycles of being viewed as a national security resource. You got to be careful where that data goes and who's touching it. And I think that makes people like Google and others very careful about how they deal with that data. They put enormous rules in place to try and ensure it's managed well. But this stuff is evolving very quickly. And so I think being ahead of this game is very important. And then the third thing I'd say, which is more worrisome to me in a different form, is that the economics of development over the last 30, 40 years of creating jobs have been to move through global trade to really move manufacturing to a different location. In the old days, trade was about who had the minerals or gold or spices, and then who could manage the logistics of getting ships to come and go safely on the high seas. Then it became that plus the arbitrage of labor cost, right? So logistics, resources, plus the arbitrage of labor. And then resources were moved around in some production cycles 10 times to complete a product. The thing is now, with AI, I'm not sure that labor arbitrage will remain as much of a positive in the trading systems. So I think you're going to get a change in the way trade works. Aside from the global trade versus more and more bilateral and regional deals that you're seeing happen already, and aside from the geopolitics, I think there is this fundamental economic underlying factor which is going to change, which is the arbitrage that labor cost brought, because AI will change that. So I think there's 3 or 4 things going on here, not all of which we have the answers to. We're kind of finding our way through it as well. But I know I'm very focused on can we help build the infrastructure and the skills for these countries. Second, can we be a good impartial convener of the ability to come to conclusions on the right kind of guardrails around regulations and ethics and data privacy and the like. I don't know that yet either. It's early days for us in that space, but those are the 2 things we think we can be helpful with.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Ajay. And let me elaborate at least the way we see it. I think because this technology represents such extraordinary opportunities of the different kinds that I was describing earlier, it's also important to make sure that everybody, can benefit from it. So that's why you want to tackle these divides that we're talking about. In our minds, at least, while there's extraordinary opportunities for all countries, both developed and developing, I see a few particular challenges for developing countries.
That's what I wanted to ask you about particularly, right. What do you want this crowd to know about the challenges you're seeing in the difference between developed and developing economies?
Well, first of all, it's worth keeping in mind that, you know, as I said, the opportunities are economic, scientific, you know, pressing societal challenges, healthcare, education, think about transforming sectors that matter, think about the delivery of public services by governments to their citizens. All of these are areas that can be transformed by this technology. But none of those gains or opportunities are automatic or even guaranteed. And that's as true for developed as it is for developing countries. But the particular challenges that I see, for example, in developing countries, I think of several kinds. Let me try to enumerate them. First, as Ajay just pointed out, there's access to what I think of the ingredients for AI. So that's access to compute, access to data, creating data, but even access to the models themselves. That's fundamentally important. So you've got those sort of challenges. Then you've got some of the basic infrastructure challenges. And as Ajay pointed out, that's both digital infrastructure, but even basic electricity and connectivity is also an important challenge. That's why I was glad Doreen was highlighting some of the connectivity and broadband challenges in the earlier discussion. Third, I think there's an enormous amount of kind of talent, skill challenges that are going to be very important. Those are both the kind of people who've got the training, experience, expertise to be able to capitalize on this technology, and then also skilling that's required for workers who are going to work alongside this technology. That's an important challenge. There's also a fourth challenge that often gets left out, which is the creation of vibrant ecosystems. I think, you know, what's going to be very important in developing countries is that there are entrepreneurs, innovators, researchers who are developing applications for their communities and their countries in order to transform and create both business and societal opportunities. So the emergence of vibrant ecosystems, I think, is a real challenge. By the way, that's a challenge both for developed economies, but also especially for developing countries. I mean, we've been glad that we've been involved in helping to create some of these ecosystems in places like Ghana and, you know, Nigeria, but also places like Brazil and other places. That's important. Let me mention one final thing. I think this came up in the previous discussion. I think it's going to be quite important to have what I think of as enabling policy. Policy that is focused not just on addressing the complexities and risks, but also enabling the innovation that's needed to fully capitalize on this technology. Because the opportunities, especially many of them that are in the public interest, are not going to happen by themselves. So unless policymakers are also focusing on enabling policy, I think Ajay's comment was correct, that which is, you know, policy should also enable the kinds of opportunities and innovation that are going to benefit societies. So I think developing countries in particular have faced these particular challenges.
I mean, I think there's an important point there, which is if you get ahead of yourself with the policies, you could stifle the growth of this innovation. If you're too far behind, you will end up with enormous challenges in reining in what could have then left the stable. But if you're able to follow quickly, meaning innovation follows, or rather policies or regulations follow innovation quickly, nimbly, then I think we're in the right place. And enabling regulatory sandboxes to experiment with these ideas, things like that are going to be very important for private sector and development and public institutions to work together to get the guardrails to work well for this thing.
Yeah, I would also add that, you know, because these challenges are so enormous, it's the reason we've been making investments to try to partner with countries both in the developed world here in the US, but also in developing countries. So for example, we're spending an enormous amount of time investing in trying to improve access to languages, for example, because this technology enables that. In fact, you know,
you need the data.
We need the data, but already we're making progress. I mean, today, for example, Google Translate now can translate 250 languages. We added 110 just in the last year. In fact, our goal is to get to 1,000 languages. When it comes to infrastructure, we've been building data center infrastructure in a variety of countries, whether it's in Latin America or in Africa or in Asia. And we've also tried to be investing in cable and broadband connectivity in different countries. And when it comes to skills, for example, just in the last several years, we've now trained over 100 million people in digital skills. And in fact, last year we announced, for example, a new additional commitment to spend another $120 million in skilling. So we're trying to do our part, but I think there's an enormous challenge and things that are going to need to happen if developing countries are going to fully benefit from this.
Let's talk about those skills, because you mentioned that at the beginning, Ajay, of your principles. I was struck by this one data point. 60% of employment in the United States in 2018 was attributed to job titles that did not exist in 1940. So I just want to ask you, I know in your upcoming spring meetings, jobs is going to be a huge priority and point of discussion. How does, as we're seeing economy slow down, as we're worrying about jobs, how does that fit into what we're talking about here?
Oh, look, there's a whole other angle here, which is if you take the steps back, why am I focusing on jobs? The reason I'm focusing on jobs as the outcome of development as compared to the input of schools and healthcare clinics being what we are focused on, trying to move from the input to the output, is because I think all our eyes need to be focused on the opportunity of the demographic bulge that's coming through the emerging economies in the coming 15 years. So in the emerging markets, 1.2 billion young people are going to become eligible for a job in terms of their age in the coming 12 to 15 years. Current forecasts are that the same countries will produce about 400 million jobs. Now, those forecasts are by economists like me, and we can be notoriously wrong, but we would not be wrong by 500 or 300%. Instead of 400, it might be 600 million jobs or 200 million. The problem is there's 1.2 billion young people coming through that pipe. And if young people do get a job, whether it's as an entrepreneur or working for a small business or working on a small farm or for a medium-sized business or whatever, then they are productive, they have hope, they have optimism, and that creates markets for people like Google. But if they don't get a job, then the downsides are quite severe. And we know about local social unrest, but the biggest problem to me is irregular, illegal migration, which puts the people at risk, but also damages all the societies where that illegal migration ends up. And I think if we are not careful, we run a very severe risk in the coming 15 to 20 years of allowing this demographic bulge to go from a dividend to a liability. To do that well, we need to start thinking about these people. And the way we are focused on it is there are 5 areas where jobs will get created in a place like Africa, for example. The first one is in infrastructure. And we talked a little bit about electricity and digital, but I'm talking about bridges, roads, airports, agricultural warehouses, railways, that. The second is in making agriculture, smallholder farmers, viable and a business in themselves so that every young child of a smallholder farmer does not feel that their future is better in an urban area trying to find a job, which today is the model in a lot of countries. We've got to change that to enable these smallholder farmers to feel that this is somewhere they can be. That's why we made a commitment to spend $9 billion a year on getting smallholder farmers through cooperatives and technology and AI and better fertilizer, better farming techniques. Again, he can talk about this better than I can.
Which would change migration patterns, as you're talking about as well.
Also, internally as well as to other places. Third is delivery of primary health care. Not just because people will become healthier, of course that's important, but because you will employ nurses and medical diagnostic technicians and PPE manufacturers, not just doctors. And when you do that, you create the ladder of jobs that every country and every society needs. And so we've committed to reach 1.5 billion people with primary health care by 2030. So you can begin to see a method to our madness of commitment. Reach for electricity, reach for agribusiness, reach for primary health care. The fourth category, where things will be very important, will be in manufacturing for local consumption, for these bilateral and regional trade deals, but manufacturing with jobs being created where the model is not outsourcing a Western job to this country, but locally relevant manufacturing. Minerals and metals. Africa has more minerals and metals for the energy transition, which we will all need. But if all we do is extract the mineral and bring it to our country and process it here, we don't create enough jobs there. That's a different model of job creation. And the fifth one is tourism. And tourism enabled by skill institutes as part of the infrastructure. So whether you do this through companies or entrepreneurs, you're going to need these five. If you look at these five, they will all be impacted by AI over the coming decade. But they will not only be impacted negatively, they will also be impacted positively. So tourism can improve with AI by generating the right kind of ideas and methods of targeting and creating individualized itineraries for the right people. Just one example, and so on and so forth. His healthcare example. I mean, I could keep going, but that's the idea.
Yeah, can I ask you about that? Because there is experimental evidence that generative AI can actually boost labor productivity and expand job opportunities, especially for lower skilled or less experienced workers. Can you talk about how you're seeing that, especially as we were just mentioning different agriculture or other programs you wanted to highlight?
Yes, absolutely. There's now a lot of recent kind of empirical experimental evidence coming out of studies that have now been done by several economists. I think actually one of them, David Otter, is going to be here later today speaking about this. And it basically shows that, you know, in many occupation types, when workers are using generative AI technologies assistively, it actually lowers the barriers of expertise and experience. And so, in fact, less skilled workers are actually able to perform at a higher level of productivity. And I think that actually reduces barriers, not just, you know, to jobs and opportunities, but for those workers, but it also increases their productive output in ways that contributes to productivity. And I think this is fundamentally important. Now, these are still early studies. We should keep watching and doing the research on this. But I want to bring it back also to what Ajay was talking about, which is areas like healthcare and agriculture. It's actually quite striking that in many places in the developing world, often there's not enough primary care. And in fact, the use of these technologies assistively can expand the number of people who can actually provide primary care. We've seen this in a few examples. For example, in maternal health, we're using AI technologies in East Africa, for example, that assists you know, less skilled people to be able to provide primary care. We just, you know, it turns out, by the way, that something like 30 to 40% of people in the developing world with TB go undiagnosed. And we've just done a year-long study in Zambia and also in India, where AI tools were able to do TB diagnostic as well as an expert doctor would. So imagine that technology in the hands of somebody who's less skilled, still able to provide that primary care. I think that's extraordinary. The same thing is happening in breast cancer, for example, in areas like diabetic retinopathy, where we've now tested something like 600,000 people in the last couple of years. We've now partnered with an organization in India, and the goal there is to try to take that kind of primary assistance up to about 6 million people. So this assistive use of technology not only delivers primary health care as an example, but also provides employment for those people with less skills who are now able to perform those functions, especially in places where the availability of primary care physicians is severely limited. But I want to say something else about the question of jobs. I think whether we're talking about developed economies or developing economies, you know, much of the research now suggests that what we'll see are kind of three kinds of effects. One is, I think it is important to say this, that there will be some occupations that will decline over time because the constituent activities and tasks are going to decline. But at the same time, we are going to see some jobs grow because demand for them is going to go up. But then the larger effect is this idea of jobs changing and being assisted in the ways that we just talked about. I think last year the International Labour Organization did this enormous study where they looked at something like, I think they covered 140 countries, looking at about 400 occupations. And one of the conclusions in that research was that the assistive effect of these technologies was going to be 6 times the displacement effect. I think that's important to keep in mind. But they did also highlight something that we all know, which is if the assistive effect is going to be that large, an enormous amount of skilling and capability building is going to be fundamentally important. I think that's a big part of the work we all have to do.
So you all have talked about so many things here. I just wanted to highlight 3 things you said before I ask you both the last question. Ajay, you started by saying it's all about how AI gets used by clients, and that the pace of this being ahead of the game is important, but that we need policies that are enabling. It sounds like both of you are saying that. But we also need developing countries have particular a need for the creation of vibrant ecosystems. So as we think about all of that, I just wanted to end by asking both of you what you're most excited about when you're thinking about the potentials for AI. And James, let's start with you. Ajay, I'll let you have the last word.
Oh, there's so much.
There's so many things. So anything we haven't talked about.
Well, I'm excited about the societal impacts, both through the advances in science, which are going to benefit everybody, but then also this idea of tackling our most pressing challenges, whether it's in food shortages, food security, the effects of climate change. I think this technology is going to help us address those things in a huge way. But I'm also excited about how this will actually enable people have access to things. Think about the world's knowledge. Think about access for education, being able to learn in your own language, being able to get customized training, being able to get personalized contextual learning. That's now possible. I think that's going to be extraordinary. I'm still amazed by the number of people who come to tools like Google Search or YouTube to learn. Think about how much better that will be when it's personalized and assisted through AI. To me, I'm a child of, I grew up in Southern Africa. The access to information and education, things that I didn't have access to, I think is game-changing and is life-changing for people. So that's what I'm excited about. But I should say this, Nyala, that as excited I am about these possibilities for people, the economy, and science, and all of these things, I don't think those gains are automatic. I think it's going to take a lot of investment and focus by not just us, but countries and policymakers to invest to make all of that possible. That's why I think it's important to highlight the critical challenges that exist. None of this is going to be automatic. That's something we all have to work on to make it happen.
Ajay?
The only thing I'd add to that is 2 things. First, I'm really excited about learning how to use ChatGPT to plan my next holiday.
That's good. You asked
That's
my fun
pretty cool,
question,
right?
how
That's
you're
pretty
using
cool.
AI.
But to the serious part of this, what he just said, think of all that from the lens of young people and this demographic bulge coming through the emerging markets, and think of what he just said can do for those young people. And to me, young people are our future. That's my optimism. That's what I come to work for. And that's what I care about. I've got grandchildren. I can't even begin to imagine how their lives will be helped by people like this guy. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Is there anything else? It sounded like you wanted to add something.
No,
I was trying to end before you finished.
No, I guess the other thing I would also just encourage everybody, with a lot of these amazing technologies, there's nothing like personally experiencing them and using them to do useful things for you. So, there are products that I use all the time. I'd encourage you just to try these.
What do you use all the time?
Oh, what do I use?
Yeah.
Actually, one of my favorite things is something called Notebook LM that we created. And the reason I find that very useful, it's actually, quite frankly, a useful way for me to learn. I don't know if any of you tried it. You can throw in papers you're trying to read and understand, and I read a lot of technical papers, and then I can engage with those papers with that technology. And if I want, I can actually create an audio podcast that I can listen to in my car that summarizes those materials. I can engage with it. It's accurate. So that's actually personally very useful.
Oh man, I got a
for me.
great idea. I'm going to take all the papers I get given in the World Bank and put them into that thing and produce English language back to me.
Yeah, so you can actually
Perfect.
You have
you can
endless
actually
podcasts for
perfect.
you to listen to.
so you can actually put in things in any language. So
No, I'm
Notebook
just kidding.
LM can
I'm
actually
just kidding.
handle.
I'm
No,
just
seriously,
kidding.
it can actually handle about 200 languages. So it's personally very helpful for me.
All right. Well, thank you so much, James, Ajay. Thank you for being with us.